Sooner or later, Putin will step down from his presidential post for one reason or another. An entire era of Putin's rule, which has already lasted longer than that of most Soviet leaders, will come to an end. And in this video we will discuss what Russia might become after Putin and consider several scenarios for future developments. The most probable scenario is the preservation of authoritarianism, which has been built in Russia for decades. In the event of the death of the President of the Russian Federation, according to the constitution, power will be transferred to the Prime Minister of Russia. Currently, that person is Mishustin. He has proven himself to be a rather typical technocrat without any ambitious desires for power, much like Putin himself once was. However, Mishustin may not become a unifying figure for the Russian elite, leading to power struggles within the ruling circles. A similar tradition existed in the Soviet Union, where power struggles ensued after the death of general secretaries. In the final years of the Union's existence, intra-party battles were conducted in a most civilized manner. For example, Gorbachev came to power through a party's choice. However, during Stalin and Khrushchev's time, power struggles were accompanied by mass repressions and conspiracies, backstage agreements, and so on. Stalin physically eliminated his rivals, such as Zinoviev and Kamenev, and exiled Trotsky from the country. Khrushchev also physically eliminated Beria and exiled Malenkov. Something similar could happen in Russia if the ruling elites fail to reach agreements among themselves. The risk of such an outcome increases, considering that many former KGB and security officers are part of the ruling elite. The struggle may affect not only the ruling elites and their affiliates, but also ordinary citizens, leading to severe consequences. But more on that later. Inter-elite struggle may intensify, especially in the event of Putin's ousting. Ultimately, power may take two paths: a collegial body or a new personalist autocracy, similar to the existing one. A collegial body may form through successful agreements between different layers of the elite, with Security Council of Russia, which includes high-ranking officials from various branches of power with different interests, serving as its foundation. Such a form of power could guarantee the stability of the regime and the retention of power for all officials. This cooperative form may preserve the regime and extend its life for a prolonged period. Continuing the individual authoritarian path seems more likely in the current system. However, who will assume this position remains uncertain. Will it be Patrushev, Bortnikov, Narishkin, or Mishustin? This directly affects the future direction of Russia's development and whether it will lean towards a tightening of the regime or some form of relaxation. If power falls in the hands of hawks like Patrushev, significant changes in Russia's domestic and foreign policies may not be expected, and there might even be a rise in repression and further isolation of Russia. There is possibility of the construction of not just authoritarianism, but a genuine totalitarian machine, a tendency that is already showing itself. Another possibility worth mentioning is the official successor to Putin. Speculation about Putin's successors have been circulating for many years. In 2008, it seemed that power would definitely transfer to a relatively liberal figure like Medvedev. However, Putin's return in 2012 and further tightening of power, as well as the constitutional changes in 2020 to allow Putin to run for 2 more terms, put an end to this scenario. It became evident that this development was unlikely. The events in Kazakhstan at the beginning of 2022 also showed Putin yet another threat: the possibility of a successor permanently removing him from power, similar to what happened with Nazarbayev. There is also the possibility of democratization of the regime in Russia. This scenario may seem improbable today, but historical precedents show that even after prolonged dictatorship, the likelihood of democratization still remains. In this context, the most striking examples are Portugal and Spain. 4 years after the death of the Portuguese dictator Salazar, who ruled the country for 32 years, the so-called Coronation Revolution took place in Portugal. The revolution essentially occurred with the help of an underground movement within the armed forces. It was a union of military officers who overthrew Salazar's successor, Marcelo Caetano. Despite the temporary government being led by the rebel military, it soon led to the democratization of Portugal and the country's final departure from the long-standing dictatorship. A similar story happened with the Spanish dictator Franco. There, it even happened without revolutions and coups. After Franco's death, his successor became Adolfo Suarez, who was appointed by the Spanish king. Adolfo personally carried out extensive reforms in the country, eliminating the rights of dictatorship in Spain and held independent elections. This way, Spain, after decades of dictatorship, transitioned to democracy. Although Spain and Portugal rid themselves of their totalitarian past only 50 years ago, today these countries are among the most democratic in the world. According to the Democracy Index, Spain ranks 24th and Portugal ranks 28th. For comparison, the United States ranks 26th and France ranks 22nd. These examples show that even the most entrenched dictatorships can enter the democratization of the regime, and this can happen peacefully and without bloodshed. However, as shown by research from the University of Rochester, only 20% of personalist autocracies transition to democracies. Nevertheless, a similar outcome is quite possible for Russia. Considering that Russia is a federation, there will be a need for a new federal treaty or even transforming Russia into a confederation. Currently, despite its formal federal status, the country is highly centralized, with all decisions being made in the Kremlin and finances being concentrated in Moscow. Putin's departure for one reason or another may trigger various forms of instability across Russia. Unlike the Soviet regime, which established party dictatorship, changes in power, although often involving conflicts between different groups, were generally stable. The current regime in Russia, however, is personalist dictatorship entirely depend on Vladimir Putin's personality. His absence from the political arena could lead to widespread instability across Russia. The transfer of power and who will become the next president of Russia are no longer obvious. There are no democratic institutions for the transfer of power, nor are there any intra-party mechanism, as in China or the Soviet Union. This could lead to constant conflicts within the ruling elite, which will affect the entire population of Russia. It may also lead to frequent state coups or instability in the security apparatus. The most apocalyptic forecast could include bloody revolution, civil war, or the complete disintegration of the state. Such processes may occur in extreme cases, if Russia experiences prolonged political and economic crisis. This would be highly dangerous for the integrity of Russia, especially considering the presence of numerous national republics and potential hotspots of separatism. This is why the possibility of some regions seceding during instability and the weakening of Moscow power exists. Clearly, many regions present within Russia today is driven by economic and political interests. If those interests disappear, the presence of many regions within Russia could become meaningless. It's worth remembering that the dissolution of the Soviet Union in the mid-1980s seemed unimaginable, but by 1991, the Soviet Union had finally disintegrated into 15 republics. Attempts to reform and save it weren't successful. Therefore, in the current circumstances, it's difficult to assess the likelihood of such an event, but it cannot be completely ruled out. In conclusion, after Putin's death, Russia could take different paths of development. The authoritarian regime created during Putin's rule may persist, but instead of one ruler, a collegial body may emerge. There is also the possibility of regime democratization, following the examples of other dictatorships' ends. And the most pessimistic scenario is the disintegration of Russia and the end of Putin's regime through body revolution or civil war. Thank you for watching, don't forget to like and comment this video. See you!